Okay, so in macro theory, we are going to focus on the goods market. What do you mean by goods market? We have the household, investment, and government and net exports. So this is called the open economy. If I have only three sectors, which is the household, in businesses, and the government, this means that we have a closed economy. So this is basically the four sectors activities that exist in any economy. Output equal demand, then this means that we are at equilibrium. So this is the ideal situation, but in reality, the demand that is here is higher than the production that we have in the market. So if we go for the goods market, the composition of the GDP is important because the power of any economy is dependent on their productivity and their outputs. So we need to dig deeper on the demand function. What are the components of the demand function in order to look how we can use different strategy to accelerate the economy. So if the demand is increases, so what kind of policy that we're going to use in order to drop the inflation, how we can use expansionary or monetary policy to control the gaps that exist in the market. So the goods market, which means when economists think about year-to-year movement in economic activity, change in demand for goods leads to change in the production, and this change in production will lead to an increase in your income. If my income changes, this will affect consequently the demand. So the demand is highly related to my income. Income more available, then the consumption exists. So the composition of the GDP, the main component is the consumption, which more than 80% or 90% in any economy. In the developing country, this percentage of consumption is less. In the developed country, the percentage is less, while in the developing country, the percentage is higher. So if I have exports more than imports, then this is represent trade surplus, and this is the China case. If we have imports more than export, so we have a trade deficit, an example of Egypt and USA. So the productivity is important because this is what reflect on the GDP. So as we said from a minute, that what are the most component that share in the GDP is the household, which is our consumption, which is here in 2014 USA GDP reached 68% from the total GDP that have. The investment is around more than 20%, and the government spending is more than 18%, and the net exports here, as you see, it is in negative. What do you mean by negative? That they are importing more than they export. So what are the demands for goods? The Z represent the demand, and this is the identity equation. What is the identity equation at equilibrium? The identity equation and equilibrium, if you see, it is components of the demand is equal consumption, investment, and government spending. So what is the Z? The Z represents the demand, what I'm demanding. So can I write here an equation or numbering in order to reflect the meaning of the demand? So I demand for goods and services by 400 billion. Okay, so the demand. What is the consumption? What is the production? What are the production? How the four sectors produce? So if the production is 500, this will be brilliant because my production is higher than the demand. So I have an excess of the product. So this is the criteria of Z. The Z usually represent the actual things that we are demanded, demand for goods and service. But what we produce, the production come from the household. Do I produce? Yes, as a household, I can produce. As a business, I can produce. Government as well do this, and the foreigners do the same situation. So this is basically the consumption function that we have it in real life. So consumption means a function of disposable income. What is the disposable income? How we can find the disposable income? The disposable income is my income minus direct tax. What is the direct tax? The direct tax that I have it is for my income level. So this is what we call it disposable income. If the government need to decrease the demand, what they do, if the government intended to decrease its demand, this is what can be reflected on the mean, on the taxes. Why? then the government can increase tax. If the government want to increase the demand, then she is going to decrease the taxes. So this is the tool. And when we talk about the tax, then this is called fiscal policy. Okay, so the Ministry of Finance, what they do, if they impose more taxes, this means the demand will decrease. If, by the way, if the government decreases subsidies of oil, let's say, for example, if the price of oil become higher and it reflected the market, so this means what? That I will pay more, and this will reflect on decrease the demand. So I decrease the subsidies. This means that the consumer are going to buy their things. So I'm trying to link between the role of the government on the consumer behavior. And the consumer behavior will affect the total demand. So if demand decreases, if I'm buying many things and I want to decrease their demand, so I will use the tools. What are the tools? Impose tax. What are the tools? Decrease subsidies. What are the tools? Decrease the incentive that the government is providing to the consumer or the business is in order to produce more. Okay, so this is basically the link between the government and the consumption function. As well, it is behavioral equation. What do you mean by behavior? Because sometimes the products are elastic or inelastic. Is necessary or not necessary that much. So in the behavior, when we go for the consumption function, as we used to know, total consumption for Veronica consumption, what will be? Not Veronica, because it is not micro. So the total consumption for the population of Bhutan, let's say, for example, it depends on constant, or we name it autonomous consumption. Okay, very nice. Autonomous consumption, which is a fixed amount of consumption that I have to buy foods and service. And it is highly affected by the marginal propensity of consumption, the slope, my tendency to consume with respect to my disposable income. And here come a very simple question. If I want to ask you, what will be my disposable income? What will be my disposable income? So kindly find my disposable income if I have a consumption function, which is 350 plus 0.75 YD. Can someone tell me what is the equilibrium point? Equilibrium point. Can someone find it? Equilibrium point. So how can we find this? So we are going to equate YD equal 350 plus 0.75 YD. So I want to find my YD. How much YD will be? So it will be 350 divided by 0.25. Then the answer will be
1,400.
4,400. So this
1,400.
1,400. This is the point of equilibrium. So this is the point of equilibrium. So this is how we can determine if they are at equilibrium or not at equilibrium. And this is what we name it behavioral equation, because we capture the behavior of the consumers. What are the behavior of the consumer? So this is simply propensity to consume. So what do you mean by propensity to consume? Marginal propensity to consume, my tendency. And the marginal propensity to consume, it is the change of consumption with respect to mean change of my disposable income. And this is what we call it C1. So the MPC, marginal propensity to consume, it is the slope, assuming that this equation is a linear equation, and the MPC, we give it in this equation C1. Very nice. And if I have a $1, this $1 is going to go for the MPC plus an MPS, which is the ideal point, the perfect situation. If I monitor all Veronica income, if I know all her income, if I know all her spending, this can be valid. But if there is income is not recorded, then it will not seen in the GDP. If I have data which is not monitored, then it will not be monitored in the GDP. So the C, it is the total consumption. The C note is the constant, which is called autonomous consumption. And the MPC represent the change of consumption. Why MPC is important? Because this is will give us the meaning of the multiplier of the economy. Why we invest in certain country and why we do not invest in the other country. This is what we call it multiplier. So it's a straight line. It can be log on reality. It can be exponential on reality. It depends on the availability of data. So if my disposable income is zero, the consumption plus is saving, consumption plus is saving, it will be zero because I'm this saving. If I have 1,000 income, I can find the rest of the equation and determine where the rest of my income goes, either for consumption or for saving, simply. So by replacing this equation, we can find the equilibrium point that we just know, because we said that we have endogenous variable, which is internal in the model, and there is an exogenous variable. What are the exogenous variable? Which is the investment, and it is taken as a constant. Why it is exogenous? Because if I have an open economy and people are investing in my country, so I will affected by the trust, the credibility, the stability of the country. But if I'm in a closed economy, that the economy will have a constant amount. Exogenous means if the country is facing unsustainable economy or unstable or risky, this means that it is not good economy. You remember, if there is a very good example why Argentina have an interest rate very high, more than 30% interest rate, and people are not putting their money in the banks. Because of that, I'm not sure that I will withdraw my money from the Argentine because it is unstable. So when we go for the demand for goods, what are the most effective policies? Something called fiscal policy. The meaning of fiscal policy, you have to remember كده, Ministry of Finance, وزارة المالية. Where is it? وزارة المالية. It is existing downtown. So the Ministry of Finance use a very important tool, which is the government budget. What is the government budget? The government budget, it is representing by the revenue of the government minus the gov expenses. Okay, so if we look for the difference between the revenues and the gov expenses, then in many cases, in all over the globe, in many countries, it is on deficit. What do you mean by deficit? Government spending is more than the government revenue. And this is represent the intervention of the fiscal policy. السياسة المالية. So the fiscal policy, what they do, either taxes, different types of taxes, subsidies, government spending on health, on security and services, and all these things. So in this example, we have the G stands for government spending, T stands for taxes, and this is the G and T are exogenous because government do not behave with the same regularity of the business. The government is in different situation. The government is not looking for the profit. The government want to provide people where they're with their needs. Very nice. So if I want to look for this equation, and this is what we did just from a minute, we need to look for the equilibrium. The equilibrium means demand equal supply, and in this is the perfect situation. It does not usually exist in real life. Why? Because the Z demand equal the consumption function. Y minus T disposable income, I plus G. And this market is open or closed? This economy is open or closed? It is closed because the IM is zero. So I want to do a simple derivation and to find what we call it multiplier. Multiplier. So to find this multiplier, I will use the equation as you see it here. And then it is y equal C naught plus C1 is very important to write it. And in order not to forget it, 1 minus T. I don't want to write the same equation, but I will multiply C1 times Y and then minus C1T plus I plus J. Okay, very nice. So what I'm going to do at the same at the problem that just we have solved, I would put the Y minus C1 y equal the rest of the equation C naught and minus C1t plus I plus G. Very nice. So I will take the y on one side, and then it will be 1 minus C1, and then I will have the most important part of the equation. So what we have here, C naught minus C1t plus I, which is the investment, plus the government here. So if I want to know what is the multiplier, so I will divide both sides. I will divide, or I multiply by 1 divided by 1 minus C1. And remember, the C1 is the marginal propensity to consume. So the y here equal, y, the function of the output, equal 1 over 1 minus C1. And 1 minus C1, it is the most important part in the equation. Why? Because this is where represented the multiplier, the accelerator, the power of the economy. And we understand, we are going to look for the meaning of this one right now. C1t plus I plus G, and then assume or given and C1, the marginal propensity of this economy equal 0.5. What will be the multiplier? What will be the multiplier? Then it will be 1 over 1 minus 0.5. Then it will be equal to. So this means when I increase any of the exogenous variable by $1, then the GDP will be increased by $2. Thank you so much, by $2. And this is the importance. So do you think to have an MPC 0.5 or the C1 0.5 better, or have C1 equal 0.9? So I need to find the multiplier here, and this is what we call the competitiveness and the big market and the number of population, and which is one of the pillar of the GCI Global Competitive Index. So here the multiplier will be equal 10. Why? How can I get this 10? 1 divided 0.1, then it will be equal 10. So if I invest $1 in economy and it give me $2 in output, it is better, or we invest $1 and it give me 10, the higher the better, it is preferred. The higher the better, it is preferred. So this is under the assumption that we have only a closed economy with a very simple example, okay? So we introduced the concept of the multiplier, we introduced the impact of the GDP, we introduced the meaning of the higher the C1 or the higher the multiplier, it will be better for me. So remember then 1 over C1, it is exactly 1 over MPS, marginal propensity to save. Okay, so, and this is in the equilibrium point, and this is what we are going to look for. By using the algebra and the math, this is the example that we did it. We put 1 minus C1 and we take it on one side, and this is characterized the output model that we can use it. And usually we care about economic growth. We care about the increase of GDP. So what are the pillars that can increase the GDP? So production. How can we increase production? Give incentives. So the government have to give incentives to the producer to produce more and give businesses act. One of the very important pillars that affected the globe, and this is what we are going to explore it later, the balanced budget. What do you mean by balanced budget? That the revenue of the government exactly equal to the government spend. Both of them are the same. But if I have a deficit, you know that United States is number 1 on the globe of debt. If I have Japan, you will find that Japan, it is the high percentage across the globe in the percentage of GDP debt. So it is reached 235%. So if we look for the balance, under the assumption it is a balance, so for sure the C minus C1t, which is the slope, which will be equal 0. It will be the same. The term 1 minus C1, as we just mentioned, it is the multiplier. the higher the multiplier, the better for me. If C1 equal 0.6, the multiplier will be 2.5, meaning that increase of consumption by 1 billion will increase the output by 2.5 billion. So this is the meaning of the multiplier effect in real life. So what are the steps to characterize the equilibrium graphically? So this is the important point that we reach the equilibrium point. I think when we determine the point of equilibrium, and this is what I ask you, if the YD equal, let's say, for example, the numerical example that we have mentioned, we look for this point, and this is called the equilibrium. And this is what I ask you many times, find the equilibrium if the consumption function is 0.5, is 50, let's say, for example, plus 0.5 YD. Can I find the equilibrium? We just mentioned, yes, it is easy, because if I want to find the point where both of them equal each other, so the YD here will be, or the point of equilibrium will be here equal 100, let's say, for example. So this is the point of equilibrium, where my consumption equal my disposable income, no one more than the other one. But if I ask you if the output is more, then we have either two cases. Either we have here the case of, we have here this point, we name it this saving, or this point we name it the saving area. So this saving area or excess of production, the excess of production, it can be reflect on the mean in export in the open market. And here it can be reflect on imports in the open markets. So this is the point of the equilibrium. And do we have equilibrium? If I'm here in Egypt, let's say, for example, let's say we will have the consumption is more than the production, unfortunately. So we import more, and this is reflect on the trade deficit. What do you mean by trade deficit? That the imports is more than the exports. This model is very interesting model, and one of the most important ones. Exactly, it exists in the Egyptian market, it exists in real life trade. What happens if the demand increases? This is the core point. What can lead the demand to increase? What are the pillars can increase the demand? So suppose that the autonomous consumption increases. Then instead of having 50, so this was the point of autonomous consumption 50, 50 is not enough anymore. So 50 is not enough anymore. So here, this is 50. I need to have 200. So this is the autonomous consumption. So if my autonomous consumption increases, this means I will have a shift. What can lead to the increase of autonomous consumption? I need more medicine. I need more food. Let's say, for example, the prices increases, so I need to spend more. So this is the meaning of autonomous. In addition, maybe the number of the people as well increases. So here we reflect on the increase of demand. If demand increases, what can increase the demand? Government spending increases. Let's say investment increases. So the demand also as well can be increasing. And this is shift upward. I put more investment. And when I shift up, this reflects on the increase of output. So can I write it? So increase in demand, shift up the curve, and lead to higher output. And this is the criteria at which is all of us is looking for. GCI said what? GCI said that it is important to have higher number of population. So if I have a higher number of population, so the number of population increases, this will give me a higher demand, and this will attract more people to invest in a country, and this is the criteria that we look for. So can it shift down? Can demand decreases? Yes, on the opposite way, we can have the inverse relation, and output will decrease. And when the output decreases, this is called the recession. And this is what exists after COVID-19, the effect of the COVID-19 shortage, drop in production. So we have a very interesting point, which is the geometric increase and the arithmetic increase. What do you mean by the geometric increase and the arithmetic increase? So if we go back, we find that the demand for food is increasing in geometric increases. What do you mean by geometric? 2, 4, 8, 16, 20. but unfortunately that I need to write it, because if we look for the number of population, they increase dramatically, and they are increasing geometric, and our demand increase in a geometric. So what do you mean by geometric? 4 multiplied 4 times 4, it is 16, and so on and so on. It is multiple. But the supply of production, which is a very important point since we are in COVID, the supply of production is arithmetic. What do you mean? Arithmetic means 1, 2, 3. So this is what are the challenging of sustainability. Why? Because the supply will be less than the demand, and this is one of the forecasted problems that we have it, which is famine. What do you mean? We will face a shortage of supply of production. And I think I said to you in one of the documentary, they said in the future in 2050 we can eat the beans, the flies that we have it in real life, because it's the only things that left with the protein to feed the humans. But I don't want to see this. Okay, so it is very, very weird. Germany start to prepare for unexpected status like that. So this is determination, and this is the output. Production depends on demand, which depends on income. So, and my income depends on my output that I have. And this is what we look for, multiplier effect, in order to see how the dynamic, what do you mean by dynamic? Having a huge number of years to see how we can adjust the production schedule. One of the very serious problem, it is the Lehman Brothers case, and it is in 2008 we have a Great Depression. We have financial crisis in 2008. In 1929 we have the Great Depression, and as you see that when we have a Great Depression, that the production decreases and liquidity decreases and end up by a crash in the economy. So Lehman Brothers, it is one of the very well-known banks in the United States. And when these banks drop of liquidity due to the mortgage problem, we find that if you see here, the disposable income in 2008 Q1, it was 1, and it started to drop. And when the disposable income dropped, then the consumption dropped. And the consumption of the durable goods as well drops. So I can ask you, what will be the consequences of the Great Depression? I will not ask a Great Depression, honestly. I will ask you honestly, what will be the impact of COVID-19 pandemic effect on disposable income? So unfortunately, according to the COVID-19, unemployment increases. A lot of people lost their jobs. And when unemployment increases, income decreases. Oops. This means that the disposable income decrease. And this is will reflect on the what? Consumption decrease. Honestly, I will not ask about 2008. I will ask about 2019, COVID-19, and the forecasting about, they are expecting that we have a new version of COVID-19 in 2025. New version. I don't know what is this new version. Because some people think that they intend to do that, or they created these viruses in order to get a solution for the problem of the geometric increase and the arithmetic increase, because the population is increasing in geometric way and the production is increasing in arithmetic way. So if we get rid of a number of population, this is the gap. It will be easy, and we're not going to eat any more flies. So this is the criteria. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for, the impact of COVID. And as you see here, this is called supply shock, external shocks. So what are the shocks that we have it? It's affected the consumption. So when we have a drop in the consumption here, or I have another drop in 2008 as well. So this is due to the Great Depression that exists. It is not a Great Depression by the word, but it is financial crisis, and it dropped by production. So what is the depression? The depressions mean a drop in GDP. So the model that we are explaining, it goes for John Maynard Keynes. We articulate the model and he focused instead on investment and saving because it is the stimulus. It is not only products, but it is the role of investment and saving. When we go for investment and saving, he produced for us the general theory of employment, interest, and money in 1936. So we will have the saving, and the saving here, by definition, public saving. It is, what is the public saving? If the government have more revenue than government expenditure, do we have a government that have a budget surplus in reality? Do we have? I think yes, we have. One of the countries that have an excess, the country name Brunei. Germany in 2018 have an excess. So the revenue here is more than the gov saving. And when we have more, this means that we have a surplus. So if we have a surplus, this means that I have enough of money, such as in Brunei, one of the government government spending, thank you. And this is can be reflected on the budget surplus, and this is can create a value added. In Hong Kong before, they were having as well budget surplus, and this is when they have a surplus, they distribute the money across the citizen there. And this is a very interesting point for looking for how John Maynard Keynes tried to solve the problem that exists in his theory of employment. So let's go for the most important relation, which is the investment equals saving. It is the ideal situation if we don't have imbalances in the economy. Do we have imbalances? What are the four imbalances that we have? The four imbalances is production is more, no, production is less than consumption. And this is the example of the food supply that we explained. Another is imbalance, which is the export is less than the import. Another imbalance, as we see here, if the government revenue is less than the government spending. So when we talk about government, then we have investment saving model. What is the IS model? It is called investment saving, and it is related to fiscal policy. And it is next time we're going to explain the role of fiscal policy in the market.